Yes, yes, we can hear you, Jenny.
Great. So welcome everybody to the second webinar to kick off to launch the collective action networks of the global coffee platform. Thank you very much for taking the time today to hear about the topic of economic viability of farming. In this call, we've got over 50 registrations. I think it was nearing 70 this morning, including everybody in the supply chain, so producers, traders, roasters, retailers, also civil society, individuals, and from all around the different regions. So in Africa, we saw registrations from Uganda and Kenya, also Tanzania. We saw from a good representation from Colombia, also Brazil, from also the consuming countries, many in Europe and across the USA as well. Also input industries and other organizations working in sustainable development. So we're very happy to have you with us today. Yesterday, we also had a very good discussion in the kickoff for the Gender and Youth Collective Action Network with good attendance and also sharing of experiences. Tomorrow, at the same time, we'll launch the Collective Action Network for Climate Smart Agriculture. This webinar is kicking off the economic viability of farming, one that's critical to Global Coffee Platform and all of our members. It was identified as one of the 3 key issues by GCP members last year to address, being directly linked to several of the Sustainable Development Goals, including ending poverty, no hunger, decent work, and many others. Today, we'll have a presentation of the quick scan that's been done over the last couple of months in 11 countries by TechnoServe with support from many other organizations with their data and inputs and thoughts. Julian Wassenaar, Julie Cho, and Paul Stewart from TechnoServe with the authors behind the scan, but many organizations, especially and in the regions, shared data to support the development of it. It's still in the draft format, and we hope that with your input, we'll finalize the scan by the end of the month. We hope that this quick scan will be the start of many good conversations of how to invest more efficiently to improve the economic viability of coffee farming for farmers around the world. To kick off the call, I'd like to pass it over to Juan Isaza. Juan Carlos is a program manager at Global Coffee Platform in Bonn and is the lead contact for this network. So I'd like to hand it over to Juan now. Thanks.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you very much for that introduction. And so our agenda for today, as mentioned, I hope you can see the screen, the presentation we have on the screen. We have an agenda. And as mentioned by Jenny, we have the presentation by TechnoServe. Briefly before that, I will do a short presentation on the collective action networks, an introduction on how we see them working and functioning, of course, with the flexibility of adapting to what the sector is needing in terms of process, but that's to be discussed. And the main presentation is, of course, the results of the quick scan, the draft results as mentioned by Jenny. After that, immediately after that, Samson from Café Africa will share with us briefly what the national platform in Uganda is planning or is starting to do regarding economic viability of farming. After that, we open the space for questions. And so meanwhile, as mentioned, you could do questions through the chat or keep them until then. We know it's a well-attended webinar, and we thank you for that. We appreciate your interest. So also, if you feel there's a need to send an email, I'm very happy to receive your questions. This is the first of several webinars, and this is a work stream or a collective action network. So we want to capture your concerns and interests. So don't feel shy to send them over by the chat or by email or in the open forum. And at the end, we will finalize with explaining when are these other meetings taking place and what is happening in October, especially. So to mention, stepping a little bit back to the bigger picture, the Global Coffee Platform is meant to place a role that adds synergies and efficiencies to already existing initiatives. That means we recognize and see, like the circle at the left, what it means, all those dots of different colors. It reflects what is happening in the sector. There are many actions taking place, many interventions in relation to sustainability issues, some better known than others, some bigger, some smaller, but all very important and all adding to the sector and sustainability. But as we know, it makes a lot of sense to maximize, optimize those investments via alignment, and so that we can act together, especially addressing those issues that are really difficult for the sector and that remain without solution for many years. So the circle in the middle refers, or is a symbol of that, working together, and that's what the CANs are about, the collective action networks, as we call them. And they are meant to be a vehicle to lead us to contribute to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. So, going in that same direction, the idea with the quick scan that is presented today, the study that has been done for 2 or 3 months by TechnoServe, plus your own input, plus any other input that is very much welcome to the CAN. Who is the CAN, or Collective Action Network? Is basically you, us, the participants in this call, and those who want to remain in the following calls that we have planned until the end of the year, and with the purpose of identifying actions that can be jointly addressed by the members around the table. So maybe each one individually of you is doing something, but this forum is an opportunity. We want it to be an opportunity to create those synergies and those actions together. One question we would like you to keep in the back of your head while listening to TechnoServe presentation, while participating, while listening to Samsung about Uganda, and all the time in relation to this collective action network, is to think which actions can be implemented, maybe at global level or maybe at national level, and who needs to be involved. This can be something that is already happening, so maybe someone could ask that others join an existing effort, or is a new action that could be identified. So with this, I want to give the floor to TechnoServe. Before that, appreciate a lot the big effort that TechnoServe has been doing, and also the help they have been receiving from many of you here participating today, and others who have been asked for data and support and information. TechnoServe is presenting a draft, which we open the floor for further feedback, and there is still 1 month or a bit less, maybe 3 weeks, to collect and to get your feedback. The information, I sent you an email with a link to the GCP Connect, where all the files, the summary and all the country files are present, so that you can find them there and help us improve the information. So with that, and the expectation basically of TechnoServe is to present a high-level view of opportunities, analyzing 11 countries, which we prioritized, thinking on where today there are national platforms or there is a big potential for platforms starting. So with this, I stop and I give the floor to Julian from TechnoServe. So please, Julian, are you with us? I need to unmute. I unmute everybody.
Hello, Juan. Thank you so much for that. Can you confirm that you're hearing me?
I can hear you, but what I'm going to do is mute everybody again and unmute you only you, so that the sound is better. Julian, Julian, I unmuted. I think you. That's Julian.
Juan, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. First of all, thank you so much to GCP for the opportunity to work on this. It was a fascinating study that both Paul, Julie, and I, and many of our other colleagues around the world have enjoyed working on. We have not been alone in this effort. I know that many of you have contributed significant time to helping us, and we sincerely appreciate all the research partners who have participated in this. Without you, this would not have been possible. So I want to start just by going through the objectives of the study. We wanted to do this quick scan basically as a benchmarking exercise so that we could understand how opportunities are similar and different across different origins. We wanted to look at the benefits for coffee farmers, both at a financial level and then also ways that they would be able to benefit through improvements and efficiencies in the supply chain at a local level, and then within each country also highlight the opportunities to increase that farmer profitability. So the way that the scan has been organized, we have done individual summaries for each of the 11 countries of interest, and then we also have a global level deck, which is similar to what you're seeing now, as well as a booklet that you can find online at the GCP website. And for this discussion today, we're going to focus on the global level results. We encourage all of you to take the time to look at specific countries of interest, and we're happy to set up times to chat and discuss specific questions that you may have on those countries at a later point. I want to spend a few minutes just quickly discussing the methodology that we went through. We had 4 steps. The first was to define the producer types. Within the 11 countries of focus, there are obviously a wide range of different types of producers, both between Arabica and Robusta in some cases, and then between farm size, altitude, level of mechanization, etc. And so we wanted to make sure that within each country we were looking at a specific type of farmer. So we should caution that the results are not meant to be national averages and are not meant to be extrapolated to cover all types of farmers within a particular origin. The types of farmers that we chose was both based on the size of the opportunity for the smallholders as well as the number of people who could benefit. And on this point, you can see in front of you the percentages of the farmers within each country that fall into the type that we've chosen. For example, if you look at Ethiopia, the vast majority of the farmers are smallholder farmers. There's a few hundred estates there, but it's almost 100% of farmers fall within the type that we looked at. You compare that with a country like Brazil, for example, which obviously has both Arabica, Robusta farmers, varying levels of mechanization spread amongst a variety of different types of regions, processing methods, and so the type that we looked at only comprises 44% of the total Brazilian farmers. And so there is a wide variety there, and we wanted to make sure that that was something that was recognized from the outset. If we go on, we wanted to be able to show you, I think that this is data that most people are probably familiar with. Along the x-axis at the bottom, we have the production volumes. And so you can see, obviously, that Brazil, Vietnam, Colombia have the 3 largest volumes of production. And then if you look at the y-axis, we can see the Arabica export prices. And so you can see the difference between an Arabica and a Robusta coffee, as well as the differences in prices between those 2 types. So you can see Kenya on the far left-hand side with a very high price for coffee, but a relatively small production volume relative to the other countries. Within the 11 countries, there's also a wide variety, or wide variance rather, in terms of the yields that farmers within these types are receiving. We can see in East Africa, the yields are much lower than in countries like Brazil and certainly than in Vietnam. Within or based on these yields, we were able to discuss with stakeholders and with our local country offices the types of improvement that might be seen if farmers were to improve agronomic practices, go through farm rehabilitation, and optimize their use of inputs. And so in some countries, we saw relatively low opportunities for yield improvement, such as Vietnam with 10%, up to 100% over the next 5 years in a country like Peru. As one might expect, there's a very high degree of correlation between the costs of production and the yields faced. So we can see, again, in Vietnam and Brazil, much higher costs of production on a per hectare basis than countries like the East African countries, where input use is far less common because production volumes are so small there. And so we see that they're related to the opportunities for improvements in productivity. There would also be an increase in costs to achieve those levels of productivity, which we have factored into our models. Finally, putting all of this together, we wanted to assess the current levels of net income on a per hectare basis. And we wanted to use the per hectare basis so that the results were transferable across all the origins. So you can see, again, as one might expect, the countries with relatively high yields and proportionately low costs are more profitable in countries like Brazil and Vietnam, even though they may be receiving lower prices, as we had seen on the second slide. In general, we've seen that farmers have been struggling with rising production costs. And so you look at a country like Colombia, for example, and you can see even though they have very high yields and relatively high prices, the net income per hectare is lower because of the high costs, especially in the past few years in Colombia. The graphic here examines the efficiency of the supply chain across the 11 origins. The brown bar that you see represents the average farm gate price as it relates to the FOB price. And we've included those prices at the bottom for reference. But in general, there are broad opportunities in East Africa to improve the supply chain efficiency and the proportion of the export price captured by farmers. You look at Vietnam's efficiency, for example, is driven by the competition between locally owned and the multinational exporters. And we found that in countries that have liberal policy environments, that this tends to allow more options for farmers and more efficiencies within the supply chain, and consequently a higher proportion of the FOB price. And this is one of the key opportunities I think that we look for going forward in the next step of the study. Across the 11 origins of study, we wanted to identify where were the greatest opportunities to increase net incomes. If you look at the x-axis on this graphic, you can see the number of farmers in millions. And so obviously Ethiopia, Uganda, Indonesia, Vietnam are the standouts in terms of numbers of farmers. But then if we also address the increase in net income that we see as being possible, we see a tremendous opportunity for net income in countries like Peru and Brazil, and even in Vietnam with a 10% increase in yields, there could be a dramatic increase in net income. I'm going to go through each country very quickly just to highlight some of the key aspects that we found there. But again, this is part of a larger conversation, and you can see the full decks at the GCP website. In Ethiopia, we see a high potential for value add through yield improvements. The key factors that we see there are farm rejuvenation and the adoption of best practices. We see this indicating a need for training amongst the smallholder farmers. And then again, looking back at the supply chain slide that we had seen before, we also see a great opportunity for improving efficiencies along the supply chain. And between these large yield improvements and quality improvements, we see the opportunity to add $573 million, and that's on an annual basis. So it's really a dramatic opportunity that we see in Ethiopia for the farmers there. In Indonesia, we looked at Robusta smallholders in southern Sumatra, and we again see a high potential value add from yield improvements. The farmers have been using lower yielding techniques in order to minimize labor costs, fertilizer usage, and immigration. And if they were able to optimize these so that they were able to achieve higher yields that would compensate for the higher costs, we see an opportunity for increases in net income. Moving on to Vietnam, we see a moderate potential for value add from lowering production costs, but primarily through increasing yields. We see a 10% potential for yield increase, and it's the size of the opportunity that makes that 10% such a dramatic increase in net income for farmers. They receive a relatively high proportion of the FOB price, and so lessons learned from Vietnam may be applicable to other origins in terms of improving the efficiency of the supply chain. If we look at Peru, this was the standout that we had heard from stakeholders in terms of potential yield improvements. The thought is that yields can be doubled at minimal cost, primarily through the adoption of good agricultural practices, such as fertilization and pruning. Farmers, again, here receive a relatively high proportion of the FOB price, which also allows them to multiply the net income effects of these improved practices. In Brazil, we see a modest potential for value add from yield increases of approximately 30%, though obviously this varies depending on the region, level of mechanization, and size of plots. The key opportunities that we saw in the subset for Brazil, we're looking at optimized fertilization, concentrated planting densities, pruning, tree cycle management, and stumping. Brazil has a very competitive and thriving coffee industry, obviously, and so farmers there do receive a relatively high proportion of the FOB price. Uganda is a great case. I know that we're going to hear from some Ugandan stakeholders later on the actions that they have been working on nationally. But we see in Uganda high potential for yield improvement again. The yields are comparatively low at about 625 kilos green per hectare, and they could be increased by about 85%. We see potential for investments to produce and distribute improved varietals and seedlings, opportunities to offer extension support, improve access to inputs, and then to adopt improved agronomic practices. If we move on to Tanzania, again, the yields are currently quite low for the Arabica smallholders. The key levers we see in Tanzania are farm rejuvenation, adoption of best practices, and access to climate-smart planting materials and affordable inputs. I'm going to keep going quickly through the remaining 4 countries. I know that we've been on this slide for quite a while. In Colombia, obviously the FNC has done a great job of establishing best practices and transmitting them to farmers. Increases in productivity would allow the farmers to spread the high costs of production in Colombia over higher volumes, and then also offer them competitive prices for the UGQ quality levels that most of the farmers in this type are producing compared to the other countries. In Kenya, again, the largest opportunity we saw for net income improvement was through yield. We see moderate opportunity in terms of reduction of processing costs. And we do see modest potential for farmers to attain price premiums through processing improvements. The current quality is quite high, though there is room to improve the processing and minimize the loss of quality. Honduras was a little bit of an outlier. There's modest potential to increase value through yield improvements. There's also a significant opportunity there for improvements in quality. We see potential to improve yields a little larger than 40%. And prior to the outbreak of La Roya, Honduras was really on track to become a top Arabica producer. And we think that they're well on their way in recent years to getting back on that track. And then finally, Nicaragua. The yields are relatively low here, and we also saw potential to increase them. The key levers here would include farm rejuvenation, adoption of best practices, and this implies that there's a gap in the smallholders' access to credit and also in training programs. So in general, the trends that we found are that improvements to net income would be driven by yield improvements. There's modest opportunity to invest in improvements that would drive increases in quality and price, and then few countries that would significantly benefit from price increases from certification because of the costs associated with certification. So in the last 5 minutes, I wanted to move on to just discuss the opportunities at a very global level. As you can see, and as I've emphasized, we see yield improvement as the primary driver. Yields could be increased from about 10% in Vietnam to 100% in Peru by improving agronomy practices. The principal countries that we see this applying to would be Peru, Nicaragua, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Kenya, Indonesia, and Uganda. If we were able to achieve these increases in yield, it would add 2.5 million metric tons of annual production over the next 10 years and generate an additional $2 billion in farmer income annually, which is just a tremendous opportunity for these farmers to really improve their incomes. And finally, on this point, we see training of the smallholder farmers through hands-on instruction delivered to small groups on a monthly basis by community trainers as the way to offer lasting impact on yield and farming practices. And so that is what we see as the key driver of these opportunities in yield improvements. In terms of quality improvements, they were primarily for Arabica farmers that were at higher altitudes. We see opportunities in Ethiopia and Indonesia particularly for the greatest number of farmers. We also see that there's going to be some changes required in the trading systems in order to incentivize these quality improvements in some origins such as Indonesia, Honduras, and Peru. And that many farmers would require access to centralized wet milling to improve quality in a country like Ethiopia or Tanzania, for example. We believe that achieving these quality improvements across 6 priority countries would generate $200 million in additional farmer income, again, on an annual basis. So again, this is a significant opportunity to help farmers. Finally, there were few countries that we saw with opportunities for cost reduction strategies. I believe that I mentioned Vietnam, but in general, these improvements to quality and yield will require both additional costs and investment for them to be achieved. And so there were not as many opportunities for cost reduction as we had been expecting. And finally, in terms of supply chain efficiencies, we saw a great variety in terms of the prices that the farmers are receiving compared to the export prices. And so if there are government policies that stimulate competition and can reduce costs, we see an opportunity for farmers to gain an even larger share of the export prices. Finally, as we're moving on to the next portion of the call, I want to focus on the next steps that we may see. Based on our experience, and as was shown within the study, there's a wide disparity of understanding on basic production indicators, even within countries and within farmer types. If stakeholders, key decision makers are able to have this basic data, this production benchmarking, it will enable them to make much more fact-based decisions. And so we hope that this information and a standardization of this going forward will really enable everyone to be speaking the same language, both globally and then also at a national level. One of the difficulties that we had encountered in the study was the comparability of data. And so we encourage people to think about how we can make data more comparable. In terms of the regulatory environment, as I just mentioned, we would like stakeholders to work with the industry, to work with farmers, farmer groups, governments, to think about what barriers exist within countries that add costs and see what ways there are to improve efficiencies. In particular, we think about regulation and support for inputs such as fertilizer. And if there are ways that we can make fertilizer inputs more accessible and less free of regulation, we think that that would drive increased adoption. As I mentioned before, we think that extension services and technical assistance, so both classroom learning and then also on-farm training, are really critical for farmers to achieve the best practice adoption that we see as being necessary for them to achieve the yields that are outlined here. And so we want to emphasize that there are a number of great programs out there that do training like this. And so just to think about the way the training is done in order to achieve these yields increases. And then finally, the last opportunity that we saw was in terms of research, both local research and global organizations that are conducting research projects to invest in both varietal research and new technologies. Obviously, the applicability of this will vary from country to country, and different countries will have different needs for different types of resources. But we encourage stakeholders to continue their research projects in these two specific areas. And so with that, I think that I will turn it back to Juan to move on to discuss the work that has been done in Uganda and how they have been engaging with these issues.
So thank you, Julian. Thank you, Julian, very much for that presentation. We will then give the space to Samson. I hope his connection doesn't fall. After Samson's presentation, then we open the room for Q&A. I hope that is fine. So let me look for Samson.
Hi, Juan. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good. Hello to everybody. Presentation will take
They
a
are
few.
muted, so they are muted, but they can hear you, Samson.
Just take a few.
Let
Okay.
me the slides. Yeah, the floor is yours, as they say.
Thank you very much, Juan. So in Uganda, we have a new target of 20 million bags along the value chain are going to do individual interventions to ensure that we'll be able to achieve that by 2020. So the things like that have been mentioned in the previous presentation, like improving of yield, productivity, and production, all and improving on GAP practices, all that is being done currently. So as the platform in Uganda, we decided to address a particular challenge. Whereas there is information on coffee production investment that is scattered, it's not harmonized, it's not updated. So the Economic Viability Working Group came together with the goal of trying to showcase the profitability of coffee farming to new and current producers. One of the biggest challenges we're facing in Uganda in the coffee industry is that we're losing our coffee farmers to other enterprises, meaning we have to repackage it. We have to repackage how we sell the aspect that coffee is the crop that will enable them improve on their livelihoods. So the steps that have been taken by the Economic Viability Group currently is that we formed a team of 15 members who are not restricted to only those who sit on the Uganda Coffee platform, but we got banks inside there, we got training academy representatives, fertilizer companies, along and some representatives from the exporters. And we've had three meetings to date. And one of the first deliverables we have is we produced a template. Members agreed that we standardize a cost-benefit analysis template that would look at the investment required for farmers from planting to harvesting of coffee. The objective was to harmonize on information or harmonize on figures that look at the production costs required from planting to harvesting and eventually to the sale of coffee. But one of the things that we have realized is that the magnitude of the task is very, very huge. And some of the people who sit on this platform are very voluntary. So getting much of their time will be a challenge. So moving forward, we are looking at contracting a consultant who will go and look at one area and then look at the figures, look and collect figures that we can input in the template in the 4 categories of farmers that we defined in Uganda. One of the other things about the information available in Uganda is that it looks at it generically for one farmer. But also, as we move along, we realize that we have different categories of farmers, both the current ones and the new ones we're going to attract. We have the subsistence, traditional, you could call them smallholders. We have the improved farmers, the guys who are at the next level, you could call them medium. Then we have those who reach the commercial level, whose acreage has increased. And then we have the guys who have hundreds and hundreds of acres where they can keep growing. Sometimes they hire other people to run their farms. So these prices differ for these different categories of farmers. And just to put it in perspective for everybody, some of the activities to which we're going to put numbers start with things as basic as weeding, pruning, fertilizer application, mulching, pesticide application, things like transport. All these things on each category of farmer. The goal or the objective is that when we move from that level, then maybe we'll be able to give a more comprehensive cost. Farmers, and I would assume it's for every origin out there, a farmer understands what do I put in and what do I get out of it. So we need to start putting the numbers in front of them and saying, if you invest in coffee, this is what you're going to earn in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and start to look at them in a way that they understand that coffee can be as a business, because we keep losing them to other enterprises here because other enterprises are able to offer money or financial necessity for immediate needs. So that is where the Uganda platform is currently, and hopefully we shall be able to complete it this year and move forward. Thank you very much, Juan.
Samson, thank you very much for generously sharing with us what is happening in the national platform in Uganda. And now we open, I give it back to Jenny so that to the questions and answers and moderation. Please raise hand. There are some questions we are already seeing. Thank you for the questions. So, Jenny, can you?
Great. So maybe I'll just hand it over to Julian now to address some of the questions, some of the quite detailed questions that are coming on in the chat. I think given the time, he'll address some of them now, and with others, he may arrange a follow-up call. Can I hand it over to you, Julian?
Did I unmute Julian?
I've unmuted Julian.
Okay, thanks.
Are you there, Julian?
Yes, sorry, I'm just trying to pull up the list of questions, which I had. Right. One moment, please.
Can you? Yeah.
If you go to the bottom of the Zoom, there's a chat. You might need to click on more with the three dots, and then you click on the chat. Starting with a question for a couple of questions from Colombia about the data collection and the
I can put it
Colombia.
Sure. So
here.
Amalia, the costs of production are mostly from a small focus group in the center of the country. So we were not able to do primary research. We were dependent on benchmarking and consolidation from various studies, as well as reviews from stakeholders. But we're happy to share that data with you as well. And we can set up a follow-up conversation if that makes sense.
I think, Julian, if you just go through the questions one by one, then you might be
Sure. We also had a question from Daniela Barbosa. Oh. Regarding with data collection, did you get all the indicators? You show us what methodology did you use, what percentage error did you use? Again, Daniela, we looked at a variety of different sources for data. We tried to use the 2015-2016 crop year, which we did in almost every country to the extent the data was possible. And we attempted to use data that was consistent with what we had seen across a variety of different data sources. And in the case of Colombia, that was true, and we can go through those with you. Catherine, when it comes to recommendations, what was the process of identifying the drivers of change? You mentioned monthly community-based training as a driver of improving yields. Did the study look at drivers by country or at a more global level? Catherine, that's a great question. We looked at, this was primarily in discussions with stakeholders about how they thought that yield improvement would be able to be achieved. And most of them had had the most positive experiences with the type of training that we had discussed. So this is at a global level rather than at a specific country level. I think that if you look at the country-specific recommendations, they're more granular. From Niels, did the study include the existence or added value of risk management aspects of farmers under the study, for example, to help farmers cope with price fluctuations as well as environmental aspects of long-term land suitability? We did not consider those in this quick scan, Niels. It's a great opportunity for us in future work to address issues of risk management and how people are able to do with smart climate agriculture. We mention them. I guess we look at this in some of the country level decks, but not necessarily at the global level. Surendra, what would be a more equivalent parameter if the percentage of farm gate income is based on the country border price rather than the FOB price, especially for landlocked countries? That is a good question, Surendra. I believe that so I would think this would be a question focused on Uganda primarily, and maybe we should be looking at another price rather than the FOB price there. I'm happy to follow up with you on that later. Paul. Thanks, Julian and Samson. Julian, the presentation shows opportunities at country level. Will the detailed report also show these opportunities at a farm level? It would be nice to see what the economics of a typical farmer looks like now and what it could look like with the recommended improvements per country. So what we have, Paul, is for farmers, what drives the model is a farmer level economics, and we look at it at a farm level and also at a per hectare level and a per pound or kilo level, depending on the country. And so we can drill down into those economics for a specific farmer within a country to see how the improvements in yields, quality, or certification might impact the individual economics of a farmer.
Sorry, Julian, I skipped one by Sue that I'm showing now on the screen. If you can.
How do you see supply growth over the 10 years that you plan to increase supply by 2.5 million? So I think, so the increase in supply that we had said, perhaps this is a reference to demand being able to meet the increased supply of 2.5 million. I think that if supply is able to grow across these countries, obviously it's going to grow differently in the various countries. Demand will respond depending on the various quality levels and price levels that we're seeing. But I think that that was generally in line with the ICO forecasts over the next 10 years.
I don't know if Sue would like to explain further, or we carry on with questions and then we open forum to see if Sue wants to mention something, then she would have a chance. Let's try.
I think maybe just in the interest of time and the extensive questions that are coming, we should keep in mind that this is a draft scan, and it was took place in at a fairly high level over 2 months using existing data. So a lot of these questions are really great, and it would be great if TechnoServe could incorporate as many of them as possible into the final version, but within the limits of it being a quick scan and a conversation starter, and the idea of getting on the same page. So are we on the same page with consistent data and analysis that we've done in the past? Also the recommendations on what kind of training works best. Clearly that's an opinion of the few stakeholders that were involved, and we did try and involve stakeholders in each country where we had local contacts. So we did socialize it a bit, but within the limits of a few weeks of time. So it would be great if people are interested in a specific country to see if they can band together, and I think it would be very interesting to do a follow-on, more in-depth study in some regions or in some countries where people would like to do this more. But how about for this call we keep it to the high level, and any questions also for Samson about what's going on in Uganda would also be great. Julian, back to you.
Yes, no, I also want to emphasize, I think that many people have country-specific questions, and it may make more sense for us to set up separate calls so that we can go through them in more detail. And also, I think that people who have questions about the methodology or who would like to see the models, we're happy to do that as well with you, though I think that in the time remaining, it doesn't make as much sense.
Okay.
Niels, what is the process format for providing feedback on the draft scans, either at the global level or the per country scan? You can email me, and you can email also Julie and Paul, the other team members, and we will set up a time to discuss them with you, or you can send us your feedback written or electronically, and we're happy to incorporate it that way as well. So please let us know what is most convenient for you.
You can send it through me, and I can then give you the email address in case it's missing, in case you don't have it.
So I think what we might do is that if you have individual comments and questions about a country, then please email Julie and Paul Stewart from TechnoServe directly. And I think that if they see, say, more than 3 or 4 interested in the same country, then they'll also be in touch with Juan Isaza from Global Coffee Platform, and we'll organize a more general call, and you know, maybe with a week's notice, and then more people can join the call if they're interested, just to make things a bit more efficient. But in the first case, please go directly to TechnoServe.
Yeah, in case you don't have the address, I was saying. Yeah, but definitely.
So Sue asks, we mentioned the ability for farmers to increase the income by $2 billion annually through production increases and $200 million from quality improvement. How did you arrive at these figures? So the way that we arrived at the figures was by looking at the total number of farmers within these types, and then looking at the net income potential that we saw for them through the yield and quality improvements that we had described. And so once we have an understanding of the net income on a per farmer level, then we multiplied that to get the country totals, and then summed those to get the global totals of 2 billion and 200 million.
Good. So there are no more questions in the chat.
So it would be great if we could make this this quick scan as you know, as good for the cost benefit of it takes to improve the quick scan. But of course, as a collective action network, we also want to move to action. And TechnoServe has, together with our country colleagues, have suggested a number of concrete actions that could be taken. For example, around training for yield improvement and so on. And of course, there's been debates for quite some time about what's the most efficient way to train farmers, what's the best cost-benefit ratio over how many years, or at which cost, on what frequency. And one of the initiatives that we're doing as Global Coffee Platform is a sustainability progress framework. So that's a process that we've been doing with the Sustainable Coffee Challenge to come up with some joint indicators, because if you can measure things in a common way, then you can really start to compare the effectiveness of investments and of efforts to train farmers, for example, and other interventions as well. So that's a separate process going on, led by George Watana, and the next call on that is on the 27th of July. And you can email me or Global Coffee Platform or George for more details on that. And the next step in that process will be to come up with the 4 or 5 key ones for GCP members to report on. But of course, we'll be using the joint list of indicators that we came up with together with the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. And we hope that many of you will also integrate those into your ways of working, so that you can also start to benchmark the work that you do and the effectiveness of your investment. So if people have any comments on the actions, if you think that, you know, you've come up with something that really improves the yield or the quality or supply chain efficiency that you would like to share with the group, or perhaps find partnerships to work with, or co-investors to work with. If you think that we've missed something in the quick scan, I mean, we've used 3 pretty broad buckets that are the obvious ones, but perhaps there are other things where people could also improve the economic viability of coffee farming that we haven't considered. So happy to hear your thoughts and ideas on what actions you're taking in the countries, and what actions you'd be interested in exploring further together with Global Coffee Platform or others in the network.
If someone would like to share something, we have.
Sure. This is Nadia. Hi, from JDE. I think Jenny, you've said it quite. You've summed it up. There's lots of stuff that's going on in different projects, and it does more or less fit into the three buckets that you're talking about: productivity, yield, and within that, all the gap training and the different methodologies to improve qualities. So there's lots and lots of examples that I could share, for example, in what we're doing on the ground with partners such as TechnoServe, with Ecom, with Olam and others. Difficult to say. I see we have 2 minutes left in the call, but maybe a next step after this is I don't know how much people can or are willing to share, what's actually going on in which countries and where is there room for pooling together resources. And some projects are coming to an end and maybe we want to extend them. Some are only reaching a specific number of farmers. Maybe we want to extend the number of farmers that are being reached. So that would be a useful exercise, I think, to share as a community. We're talking about collective action network, but lots of ideas come to mind that we'd be willing to share and explore with others.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you.
Great. That's a perfect segue into the into our final slide, slide 29, Juan, which shows the next actions in 2017. So we're now on July 19th, where we've got the draft quick scan and started to identify some actions. I think we took quite some time to discuss the scan, which is great. And the next call will be at the same time on August 22nd, where we will finalize. So we'll publish the final quick scan, and if there are any key questions or comments, hopefully most of them have been addressed in advance. But we'll focus that on small sort of pitches or presentations, maybe 5 to 10 minutes by different organizations to highlight where they feel they've been most successful in improving the economic viability, and or what they feel are the key challenges in doing that, and where they might be asking for help. So if you would like to present something, as Nadia just suggested, then please get in touch with Juan Isaza. So it's Isaza at globalcoffeeplatform.org, and volunteer yourself to show what your organization is doing, and highlight how we're improving the economic viability of farming, and then we can come up with actions. Then, of course, then we'll have a follow-up call on September 12th. And then I hope you've all got October 4th. It's a Wednesday in October. It's for the economic. It's for the Global Coffee Sustainability Conference next to the Membership Assembly of Global Coffee Platform. It'll be held in Geneva. You're all very welcome and very to come and attend, where we'll be carrying many of the actions forward. So this scan is just a start to highlight where we are and to discuss where we need to go. And we hope that you'll all join us in the next calls and be in touch with us over email or Skype in the meantime to start moving things forward. And as we see where the energy is, we'll start organizing more country-specific scans or topic-specific working groups to see where people would like to contribute and where people would like to share information and potentially do partnerships. You can see now in the chat function, Julian has shared his email address, and so that's jwaffener at tns.org for Julian and hcho at tns.org for Julie. They were the main authors of the study. Maybe Juan, if you could add your email address there as well,
Yes.
then you're all welcome to get in touch. So as a final slide, here are some dates for your diary. We hope that in the next call on the 22nd of August for the economic viability of coffee farming collective action network that we just mentioned, that you'll join us there, and we'll have more time for discussion and sharing, and not just a one-way presentation, although critical for starting the conversation by TechnoServe. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. We're 2 minutes over the hour now. Thank you very much for spending this time with us. We had over 40 participants in the call, which was really great to see, and look forward to the next steps. Have a great day. Thanks very much.
Comments, questions, please. Remaining concerns, please send them to me. And as mentioned by Jenny, send to Julian direct questions on the study.